Danas je 14. novembar 2013. godine. Kafe Novella, mjesto gdje se artisti, umjetnici skupljaju i večeras se ovdje dešava jedna interesantna stvar. Naime, imamo dobitnika Pulitzerove nagrade Davida Rohde-Caffe koji potpisuje 3 svoje knjige: A Rope and a Prayer, Endgame i Beyond the War. Gospodin David Rohde-Caffe će podijeliti samo večeras ovdje svoje iskustvo kao istraživački novinar. Naime, on je 1995. godine bio expose masakru u Srebrenici i jedan od prvih, dakle, koji su vidjeli grobnice, masovne grobnice u Srebrenici. 2 puta u njegovoj karijeri je bio zarobljen. Prvi puta 10 dana 1995. godine od strane bosanskih Srba, a onda drugi puta 2008. godine kao reporter za New York Times kidnapovan je od strane Talibana u Afganistanu i bio u zatvoru više od 7 mjeseci. Njegove knjige opisuju sve to i evo ovdje u Noveli ćemo večeras popričati sa svima, sa autorom naravno i sa gostima. Jedan od ljudi koga svi Bosanci i Hercegovci u St. Louisu znaju je svakako Ron Klutko. Nemojte da vas zavara. Amerikanac u stvari. Jedan od rijetkih koji... Ja upoznao sam mnogo Amerikanaca, ali nisam mnogo njih koji pričaju bosanski jezik. Amir priča bosanski jezik i odlično nas razumije, ali počet ćemo na engleskom, onda možda da pređe na bosanski možda. Amire, šta se dešava stvari večeras ovdje?
Večeras?
Ja.
Onaj novinar je naš prijatelj, ja sam ga upoznao prije 15 godine u Massachusetts i on je ponudio da dolazi ovdje da priča o svoje iskustvo u Bosni i u Afganistanu. To je neko sjelo za moja agencija, ja radim s izbjeglicima koji su preživjeli muku i mi pomažemo takvi ljudi i on je došao ovdje da pravi neki fundraising event, ne znam kako da to kažem.
Fundraising is okay.
Yeah. On je došao za nas da nam pomaže i mi smo vrlo drago nam da on je došao da priča sa zajednicom o svoje iskustvo i tako.
Hvala ti lijepo za ovo.
It's first of all thrilling to be back in St. Louis because I actually have family from here. My grandfather grew up in St. Louis. He's a graduate of University City High School. And I sort of said this in great detail, but I'll go for it. The earliest family history we have, my last name is Rohde. It's German. I think many people in this area say Rohde. But actually, Karl Wilhelm Rohde was the first of my ancestors. He actually came from Germany. He was a German pacifist who came to this area in the 1850s because he refused to fight in the Kaiser's army. And he settled in southern Illinois, just on the other side of the river. And the letters we have talk about that he maintained his pacifism in this area. So when the U.S. Civil War broke out in 1861, he refused to fight again for either side. So Bosnia. I'll tell a story about my initial reporting in Srebrenica. I was 27 years old when I went to cover the war in Bosnia for the Christian Science Monitor. I came near the end of the war. It was 1994. I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest. I never covered a war before. I tended to spend a lot of time with older journalists from the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Guardian. And my big kind of story and moment was the fall of Srebrenica. And it's actually doesn't start out that well. Srebrenica fell on July 11th, 1995. I was actually on vacation outside of Bosnia when Srebrenica fell. We were very surprised when it fell. The UN had promised to protect it. Many of you know the stories that the issue wasn't just that this atrocity happened, it was that the UN went into the town, took away the heavy weapons that Bosnian Muslims had to defend themselves, and then promised to defend them. And then when the Serbs attacked, they did not defend the town. There was 3 or 4 airstrikes by the Dutch Air Force. Actually, a female Dutch pilot of an F-16 was involved in one of the raids, but the Dutch peacekeepers on the ground did very little to defend the town of Srebrenica. And they did not perform well, but they were also outgunned as well. So it was the international community making the atrocity worse by actually taking away the weapons that people in Srebrenica had to defend themselves. And what I rushed back in July of 1995, And Srebrenica was in Bosnian Serb territory, a surrounded town. Many of you, particularly Bosnians, know this. And the women generally went to the UN base where they were sort of evacuated, most of them by bus. And most of the men from Srebrenica, about 20,000 of them, tried to walk through Serb-held territory. It was about 25 miles to get from Srebrenica when it fell all the way into central Bosnia, which was also controlled by the Bosnian government. And so these men are emerging from the woods saying that the Serbs are rounding up and killing people, and no one really knows the extent of it. And that's what everyone's sort of hearing in late July. No one can really confirm what's going on. And my ability to confirm the killings was really due to a change in the course of the war. This was actually now August, like 5 weeks had gone by, and no one was quite sure what had happened in Srebrenica and the extent of the killings. And if you were following the war or know, the tide of the war actually turned in late August in 1995. The fall of Srebrenica so shamed the Clinton administration and European countries that they carried out a series of NATO bomb strikes in July and August. And for the first time in the war, Serb forces started to lose. There was also, and you hear about this less, an aggressive offensive by Bosnian government troops and Croatian government troops that pushed the Serbs back. And there was a long sort of covert arming campaign that went on, but it was the heroic fighting of many Bosnian government soldiers and Croatian government soldiers that led to this huge change in territory. And the Serbs were allowing journalists in to cover all of these Serb refugees that were being pushed out of this other side of Bosnia. And I, to be honest, was deceptive. I told them I wanted to come in to talk to the Serb refugees about what was happening. And I remember I crossed into Bosnian Serb territory. I was actually in Serbia itself. And in all honesty, a border guard, instead of sending me off to western Bosnia, where the Serbs were losing all this territory and all the refugees were, he said, no, you have to drive to the capital of Pale through all of eastern Bosnia. And, you know, at first I was mad, and then I realized he's letting me, I'm driving right by Srebrenica. And what I did was we drove through Srebrenica. We picked up a hitchhiker, a Bosnian Serb soldier, and I sat in the back seat and didn't identify myself as a journalist. I'm bringing up all these ethical questions here. And I was with a translator from Serbia who was very horrified, obviously a Serb herself, by what had been happening in Bosnia. And she talked to this soldier, and he said, yes, we are still, this was like 6 weeks after the fall of Srebrenica, this hitchhiking Bosnian Serb soldier said, we capture all the Muslims we can from Srebrenica, from the woods, and we kill them all. And we then, you know, I then became thinking, like, how can I find out more about what's going on in Srebrenica? I lied. I said we had car trouble. We went back out to Belgrade. I got copies just from a newspaper of photos the United States had released at the UN Security Council of what looked like mass graves around Srebrenica. No one had gotten there on the ground to actually see what was happening there. I got those copies of those photos, and we went back into eastern Bosnia. We drove where we weren't supposed to drive, and we went to this small town called Novella, which was about halfway between Srebrenica and central Bosnia, the Bosnian government-controlled area. And there was a stretch of road that we later learned was where a lot of the Bosnians from Srebrenica were trying to cross, and there were many executions there when they would try to make it over the road. And it was me, a driver, and then this woman from Belgrade, and we kept walking around Novella. The pictures showed, the aerial pictures, that there was a soccer field. And we found the soccer field, and we were looking for this fresh digging, and we couldn't find it, and we kept walking around. And what was eerie, and we didn't really understand at the time, there were truckloads of Serb soldiers going by on the road now and then. And now and then, excuse me, you'd still hear gunshots. And still, this is August, it was late August, August 19th roughly. Srebrenica falls on July 11th. So 5 weeks later, they're still hunting down men from Srebrenica in the woods in this area. And we were getting more and more nervous about why are these two people walking around the soccer field? Why are they walking around the sort of fields nearby? And I remember that it was sort of an idea we came up with together, that I actually picked a bunch of flowers and I gave it to this Serbian translator woman who was working with me, and we actually held hands. And that was one of the ways we were able to walk around these fields. And eventually we found this spot of fresh digging, and there were empty ammunition boxes around it and these papers. And we picked up the papers, and I remember one of them was a high school diploma with a Bosnian Muslim's name on it, and all these other papers. And then we went to this other little section of field, and it was clearly a grave, and sticking up out of the ground was part of a human leg. She was shocked and horrified and as upset as I was, and she's a very brave woman to do this as a Serb from Belgrade. And we got back in our car, went back to Belgrade, and I wrote my first story. And she was threatened afterwards. I was lying, and it was a cow leg, and all these things. And that trip and finding those graves sort of set me off on this effort to prove what had happened in Srebrenica. What did it mean? I found 2 graves. Maybe it was a few dozen people, maybe a few hundred. And these men kept coming out of the woods saying, no, it's thousands of people. Thousands of people have been killed. I then did a story talking to survivors who had come out of the woods, and they were able to describe places like this soccer field where, I met people in different interviews who talked about being held on that soccer field and people being taken off and shot. Other men told me about being held in a school that was near a set of railroad tracks, and that they were all taken out in small groups from the school, taken to the other side of the railroad tracks, and shot. One man had survived by hiding under the body of his cousin for 6 hours. He just happened miraculously to not get hit by a bullet when they opened fire. And I eventually went back in a second time into Bosnian Serb territory, found that school, found the railroad tracks, and found that grave. And then there was another execution site actually at an earthen dam. And when I was at that earthen dam, there was a watchman, a Bosnian Serb watchman, and he arrested me. And I spent 10 days then in Bosnian Serb captivity. Richard Holbrook, who since passed away, but the sort of architect of the Dayton Peace Accords, did an incredible job of pressuring the Bosnian Serbs and Slobodan Milosevic in Dayton, Ohio. I was held by the Serbs during the Dayton peace talks, forcing them to get me out of jail and free me. And I'll always be very, just feel really indebted to him for all the work he did. Looking back, and sadly, as you know, there was the Dayton Agreement, there was UN war crimes investigators went in, and the current total from Srebrenica is at least 8,000 dead. A number I never imagined was true, and it's still, a just horrific, horrific event. And as a journalist, I think nothing I do will ever mean as much to me. It's been an honor almost to cover something of that consequence and to play a small role in sort of bringing out the truth. That's really our goal as journalists, and no story will ever mean as much to me as that one did.